Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter? My middle son used to talk about having a different mom before me. He would say she was blonde and looked nice but wasn't nice. He would bring it up randomly and only ever got a bit emotional when he told me that he never got to grow up when he was with her. He said he chose me to be his mom this time because I would let him grow up and get old. When he would say the last part, it was as if he was looking for reassurance. He'd ask me like, "Right, Mom? I can grow up this time?" Really scared me sometimes. I used to watch my nephew when he was about 3 or 4. One day he was at my house and pointed to a magnet of Arizona. It had a picture of the desert with rock formations. Kid pointed at it and asked where it was. He said he used to live by red rocks like that with his first family who all had straight, dark hair. His hair is blonde and curly now, and that he had a mom and a dad, and he had had a brother until he went too far into the desert too close to dark and got eaten by not dogs, not wolves but smaller. I said, "Coyotes?" And he kind of mouthed the word and said, "Oh, that's what you call them." Then he was sad and didn't want to talk about it anymore, so we had lunch, and that was the first and last time he mentioned it. As soon as I could talk, about 2, I would tell my parents about my moon family and how I had lived with them until I said a bad word and got sent to Earth and landed in a bush where my mom made a salad from the leaves, and that's how she had me. I would make my mom so mad by telling her she was doing stuff differently than my moon mama. When my son was 4, we had driven past a cemetery. He asked me if I remembered when he died and was buried. I said no and asked him what he meant by saying that. He said he had died, was buried in a cemetery, and that's when he started growing in my belly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he said this. He doesn't remember saying this. When I was 3, I used to tell my mom stories about my other family every night before bed. The siblings I had and the dog too. One day she took me to Target, and I told her I wanted big girl undies, and she said she would buy them for me, and I could wear them when I was potty trained. I told her that my other family had already potty trained me, so I could start wearing them now. I put them on that day and never had an accident after that. She never potty trained me and was just shocked. Didn't believe in ghosts until this day, but it's fair to say that now I have a slightly more open mind. Our 2-year-old daughter was playing on her own, but like she was playing hide and seek with an imaginary friend. I asked, "Are you playing hide and seek?" She said, "Yes." "Who are you playing with?" "Uncle Andrew. My wife's brother Andrew was 7 when he drowned when my wife was 5. Didn't like to talk about it, so we never mentioned it. I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time, we had a calico cat, and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people, but with him, she was gentle. He would grab her paws, and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed, my parents had another child. Another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown, and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born. My son told my parents all about Coco and Boo Boo. Described the cats to them. He was 4. My cats, Coco and Boo Boo, had died 4 or 5 years before he was born. When my mom showed him various pictures of cats we had had, he pointed them both out and told her Coco liked to knock things off the table. Coco had a nickname, Princess Knock It Off, because she would knock over anything she could. I didn't have any pictures of these cats myself, so he'd never seen them. I didn't talk to him about them either because we had other cats now. Coco and Boo Boo were littermates and a bonded pair. My younger sister, when she was 3, started talking to my mom about when I was a big girl, and you were a little girl. She said she went to my parents' wedding. She described her old self physically, and my mom says that sounded like my mom's grandmother, Grace. My sister also talked about the greenhouse she used to live in at the end of a dirt road and the fact that her mother, my mom's great-grandmother Matilda, died from a snake bite while they lived there. She described the snake as pretty, and with the full description, my mom thinks she was describing a copperhead. Now we lived in northern Nebraska, no copperheads, and Matilda died in southeast Oklahoma, Copperhead region. My sister said she killed the snake with a hoe. These discussions always took place at bedtime. One day, we were putting in the garden, and my dad was sitting down and sharpening the hoe with a file, and my sister told him he was doing it wrong. He told her to show him how to do it. She put her hands on his and placed them in the correct position, and later he said that she was right. He was doing it wrong. For those of you interested in timelines, this would be in 1980, my mother's grandmother Grace died in 1968, and her great-grandmother Matilda died in 1902. Also, we don't know if the snake bite was the cause of death for her great-grandmother, Matilda. I was 15 when these little nightly discussions were going on, so I remember them fairly well. She probably told these things on and off for about 6 months, and by 4, she would say, "I'm tired of talking about it." My little brother, when he was little, like 3 or 4, said that he was in the jungle saving animals, and one day, he had to decide if he would stay with the animals or come live with us. He chose us but reminded my mom that he couldn't stay forever, just for a little while. He passed this last January at 26 years old. I'm the kid in this case. I don't believe in the paranormal. I'm a pretty reasonable guy. I have degrees in science and healthcare, and I'm pretty grounded. But since I was a child, I had a memory of me stumbling out the back door of a club. I couldn't hold myself, either really drunk or on drugs, and I slipped down a staircase, hit my head in the alley and died. I was about 19, thin, with long blonde hair, and wearing a brown red leather jacket. I remember the neon signs, the staircase, the door I walked out of, even the interior. I could paint the picture perfectly if I had any talent in art. Anyways. So, 2 years ago, I took a leisure trip to Budapest, and while exploring the ruined pubs with my wife, I found the alley. It was funny because I remarked to my wife earlier when we arrived that I felt something about Budapest that felt like home and familiar, and I felt oddly too comfortable there, like I could have never left. I think about this quite often. My daughter is deathly afraid of fire because the fire at school killed my sister, and my other mom was really sad. When she started preschool at 3, they had a fire drill, and she cried hysterically until it was over, and she was convinced there was no fire. I had to go pick her up, and on the way home she told me she's glad they have fire drills, so all of the kids don't die like at her last school. I'm still freaked out. My son was 3 at the time. At bedtime, he said, "Mama, one time the bad guys got me and drove me in their car." And I said, "What?" And he continued to tell me a story about being locked in a room, and he was hungry, and I didn't find him. The bad guys got away, and he never got out. It scared me so much I still get freaked by it. I held him so right that night. Not me, but a friend's little sister. The whole family was out for dinner at a restaurant in a skiing village which they recently bought a cottage near. My friend's little sister, as soon as they walked in, said, "I know this place. My mother and I used to paint here." To which her mother replied, "We've never been here before, what do you mean?" She replied with, "No. My mother from before. We used to paint here all the time." The family was obviously a little freaked out but didn't think much of it as she was pretty young, and they figured just messing around. Later on, though, when talking to the waitress, the little girl again adamantly mentioned how she used to paint there, and the waitress revealed that it, in fact, was an art studio for many years in the 1900s but had been converted sometime in the early 2000s into a restaurant. Needless to say, the entire table, waitress included, got goosebumps and were at a loss for words. My daughter would refer to me as her new mommy. Then, as her vocabulary increased, she said, "You're my new mommy, but it's okay, I like you." Then one day, "You're my new mommy. I had 2 brothers, but they all died, but it's okay because I like you." She never mentioned her real family again. The last time she did, she was about 3 or 4 years old. When our son was maybe 3 or 4, he described his life as a ballerina on stage, from the lights to the music to the applause. His next words chilled me to the bone. "I was at a party on a boat, and I fell into the water, then poof, I was here." I asked him to relate the story when his father came back from a business trip a couple weeks later, and it was identical. But after that, we never discussed it again. I didn't want to go there. My daughter talks about her grandson all the time. I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but then a couple nights ago, she came out of her room at bedtime absolutely sobbing and said, "I'm sad because I miss my grandson. He lives in my old house in my old neighborhood." She has never lived anywhere other than this apartment. We have asked her about him, but it's pretty hit or miss on whether she'll actually answer or just think it's a fun game. The other night, after some questions, she told us that he sleeps in a crib and has a white tongue, but when I asked her his name a few hours ago, she said Guga and laughed and laughed. It totally could be just her imagination, but she also told me some weird things about the baby I lost a few months ago, which really makes me wonder if she remembers/knows things we don't. My daughter, when she was 3, used to talk about her imaginary friend all the time. Said he was big and fun, and spent a lot of time playing with her. One day I was scanning old photos and had a photo of my father on my desk, and she said, "Hey, how did you get a photo of my friend?" I instantly got shivers down my spine. My father died in the house 15 years previously, and she played in a room that used to be his office. I cautiously asked her to tell me more about her friend, and without hesitating, she told me he talked funny. The chill stopped me dead in my tracks because Dad was an Aussie who never lost his accent. Very recently, I was actually talking to my parents about past life memories. After I read this really interesting article, they ended up telling me about a past life memory I had aged 5. They actually seemed a tad worried talking about it, but as they don't have Reddit, I will relay it, and just to be clear, I have no memory of this myself. So aged 5, my parents brought me one of them toy police cars. I spent a little while playing in it but apparently didn't seem happy. My parents asked why I didn't seem to be liking it, and I apparently told them I didn't like it because I remember being stabbed inside a car like this before I came here. I said my skin was black then, though. They said they were a bit taken aback by this and just didn't speak any more about it, but then a while later, my granddad came round and wanted me to show him my new toy. At this point, my parents told me I refused to get in it. Saying something like what I said to them. Apart from this time, I said something more along the lines of I wasn't going to get in it because when I drove it before I came here, I was stabbed, and it hurt. I take it from how they speak about it that to them, this seemed pretty weird. I understand that because it makes me feel weird as well. Out of curiosity, I thought I'd Google and try to find if any police officers died from stab wounds around the time I was born. I am sure that many police officers die in the line of duty each year, but one did stand out. The date when I was born had one registered police death. The officer was black and died after being stabbed to death in his own patrol car. In 2006, my best friend Nick was killed in action in Iraq. We used to wrestle until one of us submitted. These sessions would start randomly and always be initiated by showing your fangs. This involved pointing your pointer and middle finger down in front of your mouth while growling at the other person. A couple of weeks after his death, some family from the other side of the country that we only see every 5 years or so was visiting. My cousin's son, who was about 5 and who I never met prior to this visit, comes over. He gives me the fangs and smiles. I asked him, "Where did you learn that?" He says, "Your friend says hi," and runs away. I went to my room and cried for a bit. When I was about 4, I walked into the laundry where Mum was doing the washing and asked her what she was doing, then stood there with my hands on my hips and said, "When I was old I didn't do it like that." Another time, I sat bolt upright from a nightmare and Mum, trying to comfort me, asked about the dream and where she was, and I apparently said coldly, "I told you, Mummy, it was a long time ago, you weren't there," and just went back to sleep. Kids are spooky, not having them for fear they'll be the horror movie kind that scurries past doorways in the dark. When my brother was about 3 back in the 90s, our family was sitting down for dinner, and he randomly said, "Dad, remember when I lived in Spain? We're from the UK," and my dad, humoring him, said, "Yeah?" And he continued that he had lived in Spain before with his other family, but he died when he was on a fishing trip with his dad, and the last thing he remembers is his dad's hand trying to reach him as he drowned. He also reeled off some Spanish names for his parents, which there was no way he would have known those kinds of names, and he started to sort of meditating in his room from time to time. He eventually stopped talking about it as he got a little older and didn't remember anything about it anymore. Crazy to hear so many other people have similar experiences.